Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 158 of the podcast for September 28th, 2012. My guest today is Art Byrne. He is the author of the new book, The Lean Turnaround: How Business Leaders Use Lean Principles to Create Value and Transform Their Company. I think Art is very well known in the Lean community for his very successful run as the CEO of Wiremold, having previously worked at companies including GE and Danaher. And he's currently the operating partner at the private equity firm J.W. Childs Associates. So in this podcast, we're going to be talking about a number of things from Art's CEO perspective, how to use operations improvement as a business strategy, why the CEO needs to be directly involved in lean transformation efforts, why stretch goals aren't demoralizing when you have the right leadership and culture in place, and many more topics, including the importance of why you need to not use lean to drive layoffs, why a no layoffs due to lean or no layoffs commitment is a really important part of this process. So I hope you enjoy the podcast. If you go to leanblog.org/158, you can find some additional links to the book, to some videos that are referenced in the podcast, other good stuff related to Art and his work. So as always, I want to thank you for taking time to listen. Well, again, our guest is Art Byrne. Thanks for taking time to talk to us today, Art.
Well, thanks, Mark, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So I was wondering if you could start off by giving kind of the brief background of your career, the companies that you've been through. Most notably, I think people would know you from Wiremold, how that kind of led to the lean success that you had there at Wiremold, how those companies contributed to that.
Right. Well, my first exposure to lean really started back in 1982, the beginning of 1982. It's my first general manager job at General Electric. Of course, it wasn't called lean then. It was we knew it as just in time or quality circles or some other term. But basically, we just started a Kanban system, and between myself and I was in the lighting business group at the time, running one of the businesses there. And one of the supplier companies that we had was also a group company. We started this Kanban system, and we took my inventory from, say, 40 days down to around 3, and my supplier partner, his business, eliminated all the inventory. So net for the group, the lighting business group, we probably went from 100 days down to 3. But the surprising thing was that what happened after we did that was interesting, because our quality got better, our space got lower, our defects went down, our customer service was better, employees were happier, all kinds of things. And that's really what got me started and got me turned on to lean. And when I left GE and went to Danaher as a group executive, then not too long after I was there, a guy that used to work for me running one of my companies, George Koenigsegger, and I came across the Shin Jiu-Jitsu company, which a lot of people know of. Shin Jiu-Jitsu, of course, was all a bunch of Toyota guys. They had all worked directly for Taiichi Ohno and been implementing lean in the Toyota group companies under Ohno. And he kind of pushed them out into the consulting world, and we were fortunate enough to come across them at a seminar and run in Hartford, Connecticut back in 1987. And we begged them to come and consult and work for us, and they said, we're too old, it's too far away, we don't speak any English, that kind of stuff. And we basically said, yeah, but we have great steaks and lobsters, and we have golf. We have lots of great golf, and they like golf. So anyway, long story short, they started working with us, and in fact, we were the first clients of Shin Jiu-Jitsu in the USA, and we were the only clients of Shin Jiu-Jitsu in the USA for about 4 years. We focused first on Jacob's Chuck and Jacob's Break, which might be stories that people know a lot about. Got tremendous results there, and really learned how to run Kaizen events and how to do things the way that Toyota has always done them. And so, they called themselves insultants, not consultants, so they were pretty tough on us. But we were very open-minded and wanted to learn, and so we decided early on, whatever they tell us to do, we're just going to do it, even if we think it's the craziest thing in the world. And a lot of times it was. And then from there, after I left Danaher, of course, I went to Wiremold as CEO, and we transformed Wiremold over the course of about 9.5, 10 years. We took the enterprise value up about 2,500% from what was only about 30 million when I got there. It was sort of a declining company to we sold it a little less than 10 years later for 770 million. So that was a great story, and along the way I learned a lot. And since then, last 10 years or so, I've been an operating partner with J.W. Childs Associates, which is a private equity firm, a middle market size, out of Boston. And so I've been transforming a number of our portfolio companies through lean as well. So that's kind of a little background on me. The key difference for me, I think, than most people that have been doing lean for a long time is that I've always done it from the effective position of a CEO. I mean, I started doing this during my first general manager job, so I've always looked at it from the CEO position and from a business point of view. What's the business implications of this? How do I improve my business? How do I improve what I'm doing with my customers? Was really the broad way that I always looked at this, and it's the way I think most people should look at it. So that's sort of the quick Reader's Digest version of sort of my background on this.
Yeah, and you've been involved, and we'll come back to this later on, you've also been involved in helping healthcare organizations, correct?
Yeah, yes, I have. When Virginia Mason first got started in the lean approach, the first company they visited was Wiremold. They brought 30 people from Seattle, Washington to Hartford, Connecticut, spent a couple of days with us. We had a great time. We both learned a lot. And from there they've sort of gone on. I think they're probably the best, the best at implementing lean in healthcare in the country. Some other good hospitals have done it quite well as well, Theta Care and a few others. But Virginia Mason to me stands out. And then one of the local hospitals here in Hartford, St. Francis, I've actually spent a lot of time conducting lean Kaizen events at St. Francis as a kind of a volunteer free consultant, if you will. And so I've learned a lot in doing that over, how does a hospital really work, and what do you need to do and what don't you need to do. I have a lot of opinions on that. And, the opportunities in hospital are just breathtaking. In fact, the opportunities in general, in my mind, in non-manufacturing companies are way bigger than in manufacturing companies, because manufacturing companies have been working on some form of productivity or efficiency always for a long, long time, whereas if you get into banks, insurance companies, hospitals, other businesses like that, they haven't been doing that stuff very much at all. Their basic idea on how you do better is you just have a new computer system. And in general, what they've done for years is sort of, in my opinion, kind of automate the waste. They don't change the processes. They don't change what they're doing. They just automate what it is they're doing and get it on a computer system and figure that'll solve things. And of course, it never does. But the opportunities in hospitals are huge. The opportunities in other non-manufacturing businesses are very big. And that's really one of the key thrusts or premises of my book, is that lean is not a manufacturing thing. It's something that applies to any business, and any business in any industry can be turned around dramatically by applying the right approach.
One thing that really struck me in the book, you talk about this strategy of actually improving the value-added work. I think the phrase I wrote down is that you said nobody thinks of this as a strategy. I mean, as opposed to new product introductions or acquisitions or other financial-driven improvements. Why do you think it is that the idea, the lean concept of improving the value-added work, the value to the customer, why is that not thought of very often by CEOs?
Well, because most people, quite honestly, it doesn't matter what kind of industry or business you're in, they take the value adding for granted. This is sort of the concept of, well, this is the way we do things here. If you take let's take a manufacturing example, and let's say that the lead time to produce product A is 6 weeks. It's always been 6 weeks. We've tried everything over long period of time, and it always takes us 6 weeks to do this. So, you accept that as the standard, as the value adding, right? And therefore, with that in mind, what you really wind up trying to do from your strategy point of view is how do you get the customer to conform to the fact that you have a 6 week lead time, and how do you overcome that particular issue other ways, like new products or expanding into new markets or other things that people traditionally think of as strategy. Whereas If instead you attacked the value adding itself and attacked the reasons that you have a 6-week lead time, and for the most part that's generally because you have long setup times, because you run everything in a batch, because of the way you account for things and do things, if you instead attack that, you could change the dynamic of what you're doing. You don't have to stop the strategic things that you're doing. You don't have to stop trying to grow your business and stop trying to get into new markets or all this other stuff. But if you went from a 6-week lead time to a 2-day lead time, all the other strategic things that you're doing now, you're going to improve the ability to implement those things. You're going to give yourself a lot of other opportunities that you won't have if you take the value added for granting. I'll give you a quick example that happened to me years ago. I was on the board of directors of a jewelry manufacturing company down in North Miami Beach, Florida, and I can't even remember the name of the company at this point, but they asked me to come down, and what did I think? And they were mostly making rings. It was gold and precious stones, that kind of thing, but they were selling to sort of the middle market, J.C. Penney, Sears, Montgomery Woods, those kind of big customers. And when I went there, I said, well, how long does it take you to make a ring? And they said, oh, it's 8 weeks, and that's the standard, of course, in the jewelry industry. And I found out later from asking other jewelry companies that I happened to bump into after that how long it took to make a ring, and every single one of them told me 8 weeks. Well, I was only there about a few days or a week, and we set up a cell, and we could do the whole thing in 2 days. So think about how dramatic that is. We changed the value adding from an 8-week lead time to a 2-day lead time. Your responsiveness to the customer, everything else changes when you do that. And so, when you ignore that or you accept that it takes 8 weeks to do the value adding, you limit your strategic horizons. And if you take the whole thing a step further, if that company or a company like that said, well, we need to go out and get a new manufacturing guy, one of the specifications that they would put on their list would be he should have some jewelry manufacturing experience. And so any guy they're going to talk to, he already knows that it takes 8 weeks to make a ring. And so what are the chances that they're going to get to 2 days? 0, pretty much. I mean, they're just going to stay at 8 weeks and struggle with the mess that entails. So focusing on value adding opens up tremendous opportunities.
That mindset you talked about of, a variation of it's always been this way, therefore it must be with, let's say customer lead times, it reminds me of, what the discussion you often have with machine changeover times. Well, it takes 8 hours, therefore it has to. Or maybe more importantly in hospitals, X% of patients get infections. It's just bound to happen. Talk about the struggle of trying to help convince people that that higher level of performance, something closer to perfection, is even possible. What's your experience in having that discussion?
Well, I think it's a very simple thing. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're going to be right. Think about that. If I think I can't eliminate infections in hospitals, and that's the premise I start with, I'm always going to be right about that. I never will eliminate them all. If, on the other hand, I'm determined to do that and I set my premise at 0 infections, I at least have a shot at it, and I'm probably going to be successful over time. So it's, people shut out the opportunities up front by deciding that this is impossible, and so they don't do it. And it's really as simple as that. And I think, setting stretch goals for your organization, to me, shows your respect for the organization, shows the respect for what your people can do. Whereas most people in management positions, however, when I try and push them to stretch goals, they'll always say, oh, well, we don't want to give people stretch goals that they don't think they can do because that will discourage them and demoralize them. But think about somebody. Our goal at Wiremold was a 50% reduction in defects every year. The guy who doesn't want to set a stretch goal, he's going to set a reduction in defects of 5% every year. So let's say that guy beats his target. He beats it by double. He does 10% reduction in defects this year. Fantastic, over his target. And we miss ours. Our average at Wiremold was sort of like a 42% reduction in defects over a long period of time. And you have to say, well, wait a minute, I missed my goal, he beat his goal, but I'm going to kill the guy, right? I'm going to kill him because my goal was 50%, so I did 40% reduction in defects. His goal was 5, he did 10. He's way behind my reduction in defect rate just because he set out a low goal. He set out to fail, really. It's kind of like if you wanted to reduce setup time in a factory or in a hospital operating room or whatever, and you said, I want to go from 3 hours to 2 hours, and the other guy said, I want to go from 3 hours to 3 minutes. Well, the guy who sets the 3-minute target and gets there, he's going to kill the other guy over time. It's just, what's your ambition? What are you trying to do? No, I think if you look at it always from a business point of view, what you're really trying to do for your business is, you're trying to deliver more value to your customer than your competitor can. And over time, that's what's going to improve the value of your organization and the value for all your stakeholders and your employees. Everything's going to improve if you do that. I always like to use the phrase, productivity equals wealth. And that's true. Historically, that's true for companies or countries or whatever. I mean, think about the Industrial Revolution. Think about why the United States is such a powerful nation. It's really because we've had tremendous productivity gains in all kinds of areas over a very long period of time. And so when you look at that, lean and the philosophy of lean and the tools of lean is probably the greatest wealth creator of all time. It's just that we get it twisted around and we think of it as a bunch of tools, not as something that will allow me to deliver better value to my customer. We just think of it as, well, I want to do it because I can cut my head count, or I want to do it because I can cut my setup time, or I can reduce my inventory or something like that. I mean, we're not looking at it as a business thing most of the time. Mm-hmm. I think that's a tragedy, really.
And you talk about getting pretty deeply involved in your experience as a CEO of getting into the details of Kaizen events for setup reduction for machines. Right. When you give that advice to other CEOs to get involved at that level of detail, is it? I'm curious to hear how you describe it to trying to convince those CEOs why they should do it, other than increasing the value of their organization and meeting customer needs. Is it about learning the details of lean? Is it about providing that leadership of those points you're talking about of not allowing stretch goals to be demoralizing because you didn't quite get there? What are the things when you say a leader, the CEO can't just write a memo?
Right.
What are those aspects of getting involved that deeply?
Well, I think that, to be successful at making a lean transformation, if you will, or a lean turnaround, you have to have sort of three things present to start with. First of all, you have to see lean as your strategy. It's not a bunch of tools. It's strategic. It's a very strategic thing, and you have to see it that way and understand that that's what you're trying to do. And you're trying to, improve your value-adding activities so that you can deliver more value to your customer. That's the strategic part of it. The second thing needs to be present is that the leader, the CEO, or plant manager, or division manager, or hospital manager, or whoever, they have to lead it in an out-front, hands-on way. They have to set the stretch goals. They have to push people. They have to always be encouraging them and telling them why we want to do this and what are we trying to do here. And if they're not doing it and they're not seeing, if they just send a memo and let somebody else do it, then no one believes it's real and not much will happen. And when it starts to fall backwards, if the CEO isn't pushing it forward again and getting it back on track, then it will always go backwards. And then the third thing that has to be present is you have to understand that, lean is really, making a lean turnaround is really all about people. The thing that you're trying to transform is your people. If your people think that it takes 3 hours to set up this machine and it has for the last 20 years and there's nothing that can be done, and you allow that to continue, then you didn't really lead them. If, on the other hand, you show them and help them and get that set up from 3 hours down to 1 minute, everybody feels pretty good about that. Everybody's pretty excited about that. And, they look at you quite differently. And, they say, okay, what do you want me to do next? Okay, we just went from 3 hours to 1 minute. That was cool. Now what are we going to do? And so the leader has to be the guy that's sort of always pushing that next thing, the next hurdle, the next challenge, if you will. And I always think that that's the most rewarding thing for a leader is when you challenge somebody to do something that they think is impossible, and then you help them and show them how to do it, and then they do it. They feel really good about themselves, and it's really nice to watch that.
Yeah.
It's very rewarding.
And then when you talk about the taking care of people or focusing on people, you talked about the wealth being created by productivity, and I'm trying to remember if this was Wiremold you were writing about, some of the things that were done to share that wealth with the employees.
Right. Well, we tried to share that a couple of ways. We had we had a profit sharing plan that everybody participated in on an equalized basis for the short term. And then we really encouraged all of our employees to be in the 401k plan, because in the 401k plan we matched their contribution with company stocks. So that was sort of their long-term plan, if you will. And we weren't a public company at the time; we were private. But at the end of the day, when we got this huge gain in enterprise value, the nice thing was that the employees through the 401k plan were the biggest shareholder, and therefore they shared in the biggest share of the wealth that was created, which is exactly what we intended. But when you get everybody participating, everybody giving ideas, and everybody gaining from what you're doing, it kind of multiplies. It's sort of most companies, all their ideas and key things they're going to do are going to come from maybe the top 20 or 30 people. But if you got 1,500 employees and you can tap into the brains of all 1,500, then again, you're going to multiply what you can do. And so understanding that as you make a lean transformation, the best ideas on how to improve the value adding will always come from the people that are doing the work. And if you listen to that and implement that, you're going to be able to go further and faster. But most people seem to miss that stuff somehow.
Yeah. Well, and was there also an explicit some form of a no layoffs commitment that was made?
Right. It's hard to do Kaizen if you don't have a no layoff promise as a result of the Kaizen. In other words, if I do a Kaizen this week and I can go from 10 people down to 3 to do the same work, and plus I can shorten the space and lead time and inventory and a bunch of other things. But say I go from 10 people to 3, and my first action next week is to lay the 7 people off that I don't need anymore. And then the week after I want to do another Kaizen, what do you think? What kind of cooperation do you think I'm going to get from anybody? So, I mean, most of this stuff is just common sense. And that's something that makes common sense.
Yeah. One other thing you wrote about, this comes back again, I think, to people in leadership, creating a culture where it's okay to fail in the context of trying to do Kaizen. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I think, you always learn from trying to do things. And one of my Japanese senseis used to always tell me, he said, Byrne-san, if you don't try something, no knowledge can visit you. And I always thought that was pretty profound. And so, I used to encourage particularly our younger product development engineers that, how come you guys aren't failing more? What, I don't see failures. I'd like to see you fail some more. And at first they thought I was a little nutty, but then they sort of got the idea that it's okay to have a lot of small failures. What we don't want you to do is to save up and have, when you do fail, you have a really big failure that can sink the company. And so trying to create an environment where as long as you're trying, we're not going to ding you for failing. We're going to encourage you to try again. And that's very opposite the sort of traditional command and control environment where if something goes wrong, the first question is, who? Who did that? Let's fire that guy. And, that creates an environment of fear. And it's very hard to get much gains and move forward in an organization where everybody is afraid of trying something because they might fail and might get fired. So you really just have to create the opposite of that if you want everybody to participate. And because people are the most important thing here and you have to respect their ideas and implement them, that you have to create that kind of environment, I think.
Yeah. Now, last question, and maybe I'm asking you to generalize too much, but with your experience in healthcare, I mean, what are your perceptions of healthcare CEOs as opposed to manufacturing and industry CEOs in terms of their willingness to get involved the way that you've recommended?
Well, the ones that have gotten involved the way I recommend, Gary Kaplan at Virginia Mason, for example, have had tremendous success, and the organizations look to them for the leadership and then push to the next level. Other CEOs are just like a lot of the manufacturing CEOs, whereas, okay, yeah, well, this sounds like a good idea, but I'm just so busy. I can't be doing that stuff. I'm too busy. I have to delegate this stuff. And, it's really hard to get CEOs in healthcare or non-healthcare involved. But healthcare has tremendous opportunities. In almost every Kaizen I've ever done in the hospital, I get the team together the first day and they say, we're going to work on this particular problem. And I say, okay, now let's go through and tell me what's the biggest issue you have here. And almost 100% of the time, all the hands go up and they say, it's the doctors. And you say, oh, good, that's amazing. I said, but look, we got a hospital here, and the one that I've spent the most time in, about 5,000 employees, and only 500 of them are doctors. And so I always would say, well, look, let's not worry about the doctors. Let's worry about making what the other 4,500 people do way more efficient. And I can pretty much guarantee you I can get the doctors to come along and do whatever you need them to do, and they will. And that's always been the case, but nobody ever thinks of it that way. Because, hospitals are a tremendous silo operations. I mean, there's very few places that are as big as silo operations as hospitals. And if you don't have leadership to try and change that, it's very difficult to do. And yet, if you think of a hospital, it has natural value streams. For example, anything related to the heart. In a 5,000-person hospital, it's probably a $500 or $600 million business. I'd be shocked if heart-related things wasn't really something like a $125 million business all by itself. And maybe you have a business called, I would call it bones, but or babies or whatever. But you understand what I'm saying? The value streams that exist in the hospital. And for example, I did a Kaizen at St. Francis, and it was creating a discharge policy for the cardiac care floor, which is the floor where patients that had open heart surgery went to recovery. They didn't have a discharge policy, so we created one. And I said, look, what I want you to do is, as soon as the person arrives on the floor, I want you to set a day and an hour of the day when that person's going to go home. And then I want you to monitor this and track how close to our targets and estimates we're hitting and how we're doing. And of course, at first they all say, oh, you can't do that, blah, 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 blah. But then when you ask the question, well, what is it that they have to do? What are the things that we want to track every day that they have to do to go home? And in that particular case, there was only two things. They had to walk and they had to pee. And really it was, and the reality was, it's pretty damn predictable when they could go home. But because there was no discharge policy, they got discharged at the shift change of the doctors later in the day. Then they had no ride home, and then so you had them through dinner, and then you had them into the night. And new entrants into the ward couldn't come in because you were clogging up with the bed, clogging up a bed that was going to free up at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, and you're going to be empty all night. And so we created this discharge policy. We created the whole thing. And then when you went to say, okay, now who's going to monitor this? Well, there was cardiac surgeons, there were cardiac PAs, there were cardiac nurses, and then there were the cardiologists. So you got 4 separate groups, 4 separate silos, but nobody was in charge of something like this. So if you had a value stream leader or somebody who could manage and run that kind of thing, the gains for hospitals would be astronomical. But unfortunately, the silo approach and the silo mentality makes it very, very hard to do.
Well, there's so much opportunity, and thankfully, there's some organizations like you mentioned, Virginia Mason and others who are getting great advice from people like yourself. And there's a lot of great advice in your book, The Lean Turnaround, as you were saying, about the thinking, that you know, the stories that you tell that illustrate that thinking, and the experience that you share and the advice you have for people. Highly recommended. Book is pretty widely available from McGraw-Hill, I'm sure, on Amazon and all the other usual places. Art, do you have any final thoughts for the listeners or advice or anything else that you'd like to say as we close?
Well, my only thought or hope, and the reason I wrote the book in the first place, is that I was trying to provide a roadmap for people to be able to make a lean turnaround, to improve the business dramatically by following the steps that we outline in the book. And, you know, if I can get, you know, another 100, 200 people to have a really great success, that would be the satisfaction for me, because I just see us, you know, lean's been around a long time. A lot of companies have tried, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the number that are really successful have really done this the right way and have looked at it as a strategy and a business thing, not as a bunch of tools, is quite limited, I think. And so I'm just trying to add to the pile and hope that more and more people can understand what this is all about and what huge opportunities that they have from doing it. You know, if you just look at Wiremold increasing its enterprise value by 2,500% over 10 years, and you know, if you told a CEO that if you followed this approach you could do the same thing, and he said, well, I'm not really interested, I'm pretty busy right now. You know, and to me, he's in the wrong job. Why is he in that job? What's he doing? And so all I'm trying to do with the book and all is to sort of pass on. I've been doing this from the CEO position for over 30 years. I've learned a lot, and I was just trying to pass on the knowledge that I've gained so that hopefully some other people can be successful.
Yeah, well, and thank you for doing that. Thank you for writing the book and for taking time to tell just a little bit about it here on the podcast. I really appreciate it, Art.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, and take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.